All right, we're going to start this out with a size 14 curved nymph hook in the vise. And on the hook, I have a brass countersunk bead. For the thread, I'm going to go with this light Cahill colored adot veevus. You can go with a number of different options, but I want a round thread for this because we're going to use a dubbed body. So we're going to get our thread going here right about the midpoint of our hook shank, which is how these nymphs are normally proportioned. We'll get a couple of wraps going, and before I go any further, I'm going to immediately tie in my first material, which is some of this pheasant tail. Now, light Cahills are clinger nymphs, and if you ever look at the naturals, they have pretty pronounced splayed out tails of 3 fibers. So we're going to mimic that with some pheasant tail. And the way I'm going to tie these in, when you pull it off the stem, you can see how those fibers are kind of stuck together. So I'm going to leave those bound like that, put them right up against the shank, get a loose wrap to gather them, and then just a couple of wraps to lock them in. Now clearly that tail is much too long right now, but if I build my tapered body and then wait till my thread is down here after all of that to tie this tail in, I'm going to have a little too much bulk at the tail. So I want to build my body with this material already tied in, and you can fix the length issue pretty easily by simply grabbing the butt ends and pulling that through. And that's about good right there. Cahills have pretty long pronounced tails, so it's okay to have that tail a little bit longer than you would normally have for a mayfly. And with those tied in, I'm simply going to grip them and hold them in place, advance my thread a third of the way down the hook shank, double back to the front, go down another third, double back to the front again, and that's just going to help us build our taper. And you don't have to be too precise with the taper because we're going to dub the body. The tapered underbody just kind of fills in some of that space and makes it so that you don't have to use so much dubbing for the fly, which will help it from sinking at the rate you want it to sink at. Okay, so right now the tails are splayed out nicely. I mean, I want them splayed out more than that, but they're sitting pretty good. The problem is if I leave them like that, the second this fly hits the water, the current's going to flow back and it's going to combine those tails together and you're going to lose that effect. So what we want to do is we want to run some thread wraps through those fibers to kind of lock them in and keep them spread out like that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm simply going to take a thread wrap underneath, whoops, forgot a step. The easiest thing to do is we're going to take our thumb, push it up underneath the tails, and that'll kind of splay them out a little bit more and get them set exactly where you want them. So I'm going to run now a thread wrap underneath, and I'm not going to show you this because I kind of like the way this tail is sitting right now, but if I start running my thread in between these two fibers right now, as soon as I angle my thread towards the back of the fly, that thread's going to jump down onto the bend of the hook, and I don't want that to happen. So what I'm going to do to counteract that is I'm going to take one wrap to save my work, and then I'm going to come in here and just throw in a quick half hitch knot, and that'll lock my thread right there and keep it from jumping around on me. Now that that's set, I'm going to run my thread in between those fibers, get that locked down, take a wrap to save my work, throw in another hitch, keep my thread from jumping, and we're good so far. So now what we got to do is we got to run a thread wrap in between these fibers. So just kind of hold that steady while you bring your thread over. Take a wrap to save your work. And we're going to throw in another half hitch and lock that in. So the tail right now is sitting kind of where I want it. That middle fiber is sitting a little low, so I'm just going to run one more thread wrap underneath to kind of support that a little bit, and then we're all good to go with the tail. And that's kind of how we want it splayed out. Is the current still going to move the tail? Yeah, but by securing those fibers, you're going to help it to maintain that position to some extent, which is a pretty key feature of this type of nymph. So on my way back to the front of the fly, I'm just going to take some extra small copper wire, get that tied in, and secure it as I advance towards the front, and then bring my thread back towards the tail. Get that wire where I want it. Now, before I get all the way back to the very back of the fly, I want to tie in one more piece of material. The back of these nymphs are pretty dark, so I'm going to imitate that with a rusty brown turkey biot, and you can see the curvature as it faces down. I want to tie this in with the curvature up, and the reason why is I'm going to flip this over on top of the body. So I'm going to tie it in upside down, knowing I'm just going to flip it anyway. Sometimes you got to hold that point. We're tying it in point first. So if that's rolling on you, just hold it till you get a wrap on there. There we go. And then get behind the wire. I like to leave the wire about a wrap ahead of my tail, because when you start wrapping the wire, you don't want it to gather up your tail fibers. Now, this fly can be tied as a thread body, especially if the thread is as accurately colored as this, but I'm going to dub this. And to do that, I'm just going to use some simple cream-colored light Cahill dubbing. And you don't have to go too crazy with this. That's why I built a tapered underbody, so that I have to use less dubbing. Kind of helps with the sink rate. If you just have a big, thickly dubbed nymph, it'll even float for a few drifts before it even gets down. So I'm just going to apply a consistent, tight dubbing noodle. All right. So we're going to take a couple wraps until that dubbing starts to gather. So it's starting to be applied right there. Get that over on the other side of the wire. And we're just going to take tight touching wraps all the way up, following the path of that tapered underbody. And the reason why we use a thinner, tighter dubbing noodle is because it gives you more control over shaping that body as you move your way up. And I kind of ran out of dubbing here, so I'm just going to have to reapply some. And again, the colors and everything on this nymph are geared towards a light Cahill, but these clinger nymphs all have kind of the same general features, so you can switch up the colors and mimic a number of different mayflies with this type of pattern. But Cahills are a big menu item where I am, so I always make sure that I've got a good chunk of these. So my thread is jumping off of the body because I didn't create any sort of ramp to ease that transition. And I purposely didn't do that because anytime I'm doing dubbing, I really don't care what the underbody looks like. It's just all going to get covered. If I was doing like a quill body or something, yeah, see that jump right there is because, you know, there's no ramp leading up. So I'll just kind of create one real quick. I just don't care enough to do that because you're going to cover it all with dubbing. But if I was doing something like I was saying before, like with a quill body or, you know, something where that matters, then, you know, you pay a little more attention to something like that. But it really doesn't matter when you're just dubbing over it. Okay, so now we're going to take this biot, fold it over the top, give a loose wrap to kind of collect it, give a quick check, make sure it's centered, which it is, and then double your thread back to where you finished your body to get that locked in and trim your excess. Start to wrap the wire with evenly spaced wraps, and be sure to apply a little bit of extra pressure when you go over the top because that'll take the wire and make it bite into the dubbing and bite into that biot and give you that, that segmented bug look that you're looking for. And you apply just a little bit of pressure when you're on the top. And then give it a couple of wraps so that it doesn't move around on you. And secure it with your thread. This is extra small copper wire, so it's pretty easy to just take a couple of helicopters and it'll pop right off. All right, light Cahills have a pretty prominent wing case. So for that, I'm going to use a mallard feather. This is dyed wood duck. Now, when you look at a dyed package of mallard, because it's dyed, there's some variation amongst the feathers. Some of them are more dyed than others. There's feathers in there that are just really bland and don't really have a whole lot of color or a lot of feature to them. You don't want those. Cahill wing cases are pretty prominent. So what you really want to do is you want to sift through that and find yourself a feather where that modeling is pretty apparent. You don't want that to be dull. So this is a really, really nice feather that I pulled out of there. Really, really good, prominent, consistent modeling. And that's going to do a really, really good job of mimicking this wing case. So just going to kind of cut the butt ends off there so I can line everything up. And I'm going to take these fibers and I'm going to grip them by the tip. I just want to align them a little bit. They don't have to be fully aligned, but I'm going to grip them by the tip and leave them flat like that and just orient them on the side of the shank and use my thread to gather all the fibers. And once I have control over it, just advance my thread back towards the end of the body and then come in here and trim off the excess. So this is going to have a dubbed thorax, much like many other nymphs. But what I want to do is, this bead is not going to stay at the front. So I'm going to slide this back and see how far back I can get it. And right about there is where that bead's going to end up. So by measuring that out, I can kind of see how much dubbing I have to apply before I flip my thread around to the front of the bead. So I don't really need to fill in a ton of space here. I think a few wraps will probably take care of that, no problem. Get that back up there, and that's about good right there. You can just take your thread and just flip it over the top of the bead, but I like to just put a knot in my thread, get it right out of there, and just restart it on the other side. I don't think there's too much of an issue with doing that. So slide the bead up, get that up against your dubbing, and then reapply your thread on the other side. Get that out of there. So I'm going to go and build up a little bit of a dam just to kind of get that bead to where it's going to stay where it is. And get up there. And we're going to go right back to applying dubbing. There we go. We'll just use the taper of our thread to guide us down. And there we go. All right, so the final thing we're going to tie in is we're going to get some legs on here. And to do that, we're just going to use some natural partridge. So I'm going to rip all this fuzzy stuff off here at the bottom. You don't want any of that. Try to even it up so you got the same amount of fibers on both sides. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a pair of fine point scissors and I'm just going to slip it right into the middle of the feather and cut out a notch. I want a little bit more off than that. There. All right, so what we have, something that looks like that. And I'm going to stroke everything forward, kind of get it all going in the same direction, pinch it with my thumb, and just align this on both sides of the fly. And while holding it, I'm going to gather all those fibers, hold them against the side of the fly, while I take a loose wrap to gather them and get them secured. You can do a little bit of manipulating after you're done with that. Make sure that they're sitting on the side where you want and they're not off, too much on the top or bottom. So obviously they're a little too long, but I did that on purpose. You can simply just grip them and slowly pull that through to size them up. They're still kind of flopping around on me. Didn't really pick the best feather, but no biggie. I'd like to shorten them up a little bit more. That's about good right there. So we can tighten that down, get a wrap in front. You can either take some fine point scissors or a razor blade, one of the two, and just come in and snip that off. Last order of business, we're gonna split these legs with our wing case. So we're gonna keep those fibers separated, try not to bunch them together too much. Fold them directly over the top. And at the head, just use your thread to gather all those fibers. Get those locked in. Get a wrap in the front. And same thing, use a razor blade or some fine point scissors. And just get those fibers out of there. And the last order of business is we'll clean that head up a little bit. If I can just fold that back a little bit. Oops. And we'll get it all finished up with a whip finish. Now, if you want, you can simply just leave the fly as is. It is certainly done. But there are some flies that I do like to get a little bit of a glossy head on them. This is one of them, so I'm just going to dab that. I'm going to let that resin just sink into those threads. Pretty sure I steered clear of the eye, but if you're not sure, pretty easy to clear it out. Just stick a feather in there. I got a little chunk sticking off, keeping me from getting it in there. Just pull it through, all clear. Zap it. And that is pretty much it. That is it. That is a light Cahill nymph. Excellent fly in my area. I fish the dries a lot, and I fish this type of nymph a lot. The reason why I use the brass bead is because I don't really need tungsten because I'm not really bottom bouncing this. This is a clinger nymph that is going to be sitting in the riffles that once it gets washed down, it dumps into a run, and usually there's fish there ready to pick them off. So that's kind of how I fish this. I drift it down through a riffle into a run, and then I swing it. It's a really popular way of fishing this nymph. That's why you see a lot of light Cahills that are tied as wet flies. It's a really good fly to swing. So really, really effective. A pretty standard bug out where I am. So that is the light Cahill nymph. Any questions, anything, just throw them right in the comments and I'll respond.